that, and you could do it for your other colleague and say, well, I'll do a focus group for you. And then, you know, maybe the feedback can be difficult, but if the students can't do that, when they go into work, they're going to have to learn how to give and receive constructive feedback. And that's a learning in itself in business. And you could structure the dialogue in that way. So try different things. It might be you have a suggestion box. You know, what you might think might work for you, but just that if they're not telling you, you say, well, actually, you have to do it. The other thing you can do is, as part of the assessment, you can ask them to do a critical reflection that you mark. You know, you can ask them to do a reflective diary. So that's, you know, how you do things, a bit like a portfolio. So, you know, and say, this has got to be honest, but you've got to construct it in a you know, you can practice giving and receiving constructive